A 2% difference sounds insignificant. Most people would not change a decision over a gap that small. In personal finance, that assumption is costly. Over time, a 2% difference in returns, fees, or efficiency can translate into hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost wealth. The real problem is that people evaluate financial decisions in short time frames. They compare annual percentages instead of long-term outcomes. If one option earns 5% and another earns 7%, the instinctive reaction is that the difference is minor. Both seem reasonable. Both seem good enough. This is where the mistake begins. Consider a simple scenario. An individual invests $500 per month for 30 years. At a 5% annual return, the portfolio grows to roughly $416,000. At a 7% return, the same monthly contribution grows to about $613,000. The difference is nearly $200,000. Increase the time horizon slightly, increase contributions modestly, or start earlier, and that gap approaches or exceeds $300,000. Nothing dramatic changed. The behavior stayed consistent. Only the percentage differed. Most people believe they are doing everything right because they are saving, investing, and avoiding obvious mistakes. They assume that as long as they are in the market or using common financial products, the details will not matter much. This belief is reinforced by how percentages are presented. A 2% fee, a 2% lower return, or a 2% drag from inefficiency is framed as acceptable or unavoidable. The consequence of this thinking is structural underperformance. The portfolio grows, but not efficiently. Over the first few years, the difference is barely visible. After 10 years, it is noticeable, but still easy to dismiss. After 20 to 30 years, it becomes decisive. By that point, correcting the mistake is no longer possible because time, not effort, was the missing input. This problem is not limited to investments. The same 2% effect appears in retirement accounts with higher fees, conservative default allocations, poorly structured employer plans, and inconsistent contribution increases. It also appears in savings rates, tax efficiency, and lifestyle decisions that reduce investable surplus slightly but permanently. Each decision seems small. Together, they define the outcome. The most dangerous part is that nothing feels wrong along the way. Account balances go up, statements look positive, progress appears steady, the loss is invisible because it is measured against what could have happened, not what did. Most people never calculate that alternative path. This is why the issue persists, even among financially responsible individuals. The mistake is not reckless behavior or lack of discipline. It is underestimating the power of compounding differences and overestimating the safety of close enough decisions. Until the long-term math is made explicit, a 2% gap will continue to feel harmless. In reality, it quietly determines whether decades of effort produce financial independence or a shortfall that cannot be corrected later. To understand why a 2% difference becomes so expensive, it helps to look at how financial systems are actually built in real life. The issue is not that people ignore math. It is that the structure around income, investing, and decision-making minimizes the importance of small differences and hides their cumulative effect. Most income arrives in fixed intervals. Salaries are paid biweekly or monthly. Contributions to retirement accounts are automated. Investment choices are set once and then left unchanged for years. This structure encourages passive behavior. Once a system is running, people assume it is handled. Small inefficiencies are tolerated because correcting them feels unnecessary or overly complex. Behavior reinforces this. A 2% difference is often framed as noise rather than signal. When choosing between funds, platforms, or strategies, people are told to focus on participation, not optimization. Advice like "the key is just to invest" is well-intentioned, but incomplete. It shifts attention away from how capital compounds and toward the act of investing itself. As a result, decisions that slightly reduce efficiency become permanent. Consider a common scenario. Two coworkers both contribute $600 per month to their retirement accounts for 35 years. One uses a low-cost index fund with an average net return of 7%. The other uses a fund with higher fees and slightly lower performance, resulting in a 5% net return. Over the first 10 years, the difference between their balances is modest. Both feel on track. After 20 years, the gap becomes noticeable. By year 35, the higher efficiency account can be worth more than $300,000 extra. The lower return investor did not make a bad choice. They made a slightly less efficient one and never revisited it. Another example appears outside investing. A household that saves 10% of income instead of 12% often feels responsible. The difference seems trivial. On a $75,000 income, that is $1,500 per year. Over 30 years, assuming moderate growth, that gap can exceed $250,000. Again, the behavior feels sound. The structure quietly determines the outcome. Standard advice fails because it treats finance as a checklist rather than a system. Save regularly. Invest long term. Avoid panic. These guidelines are necessary, but they do not address efficiency. They assume that once good habits exist, results will follow automatically. In reality, habits determine direction, but efficiency determines magnitude. Another reason advice falls short is that it rarely frames decisions in future dollars. Percentages are easier to ignore than outcomes. A 2% fee sounds small. A $300,000 shortfall does not. Without translating small differences into long-term consequences, there is no urgency to correct them. Finally, there is no natural feedback loop. Markets do not send warnings when returns are slightly below potential. Statements do not show alternative outcomes. Without a system that periodically reviews efficiency, underperformance becomes invisible until it is too late to fix. This is why the problem persists across income levels and education. It is not a lack of effort, it is the absence of a framework that treats small differences as structural variables rather than rounding errors. The first major mistake is dismissing small percentage differences as irrelevant. Many people assume that being close enough is sufficient. A return of 5% instead of 7%, a fee difference of 1–2%, or a slightly more conservative allocation all feel minor. The mistake is not misunderstanding math, but misunderstanding time. Percentages do not operate in isolation, they compound. The second mistake is setting financial decisions once and never revisiting them. Retirement accounts, investment funds, and contribution rates are often chosen early and then left untouched for decades. What starts as a reasonable default slowly turns into a permanent drag. The individual remains disciplined, contributes regularly, and avoids panic, yet still underperforms because the system itself is inefficient. The third mistake is focusing on income growth while ignoring efficiency. Many people assume that earning more will compensate for small inefficiencies. In reality, higher income often increases the absolute cost of those inefficiencies. A 2% gap on a $200,000 portfolio is manageable. The same gap on a $1,000 portfolio is not. The problem scales with success. To understand the consequences, consider a simple projection. An individual invests $600 per month for 30 years. At a 7% annual return, the portfolio grows to approximately $680,000. At 5%, it grows to about $500,000. The difference is roughly $180,000. Extend the timeline to 35 years or increase contributions modestly, and the gap approaches $300,000. No additional risk was taken in the higher return scenario. The difference came entirely from efficiency. Now consider fees. A 2% annual fee on a retirement account does not mean losing 2% of the final balance. It means losing the compounding of that 2% every year. On a long-term portfolio, fees of that size can consume 30–40% of the final value. Over 25 to 30 years, that often translates into hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred quietly from the investor to the provider. The 5-year consequence of these mistakes is subtle. Account balances still grow. Progress feels real. The gap between efficient and inefficient choices is visible but not alarming. At 10 years, the difference becomes meaningful. One path begins to accelerate, while the other grows steadily but slower. By 20 years, the outcome is locked in. The remaining time is insufficient to compensate through higher contributions alone. This is where many people misdiagnose the problem. They conclude that they did not earn enough, did not save enough, or started too late. In reality, two individuals with identical incomes and identical savings behavior can end up hundreds of thousands of dollars apart, purely due to a small, persistent efficiency gap. The core issue is not income level. Plenty of high earners underperform, and many moderate earners do well. The deciding factor is how efficiently money is allowed to compound over time. A 2% difference is not a rounding error. It is a structural decision that determines whether decades of discipline produce financial security or a shortfall that cannot be corrected later. The cost is not felt immediately, which is why the mistake persists, but the math is unforgiving. Time amplifies small decisions, and once time is gone, no amount of effort can replace it. The solution to the 2% problem is not chasing higher returns or taking more risk. It is building a system that protects efficiency over long periods of time. The goal is not optimization for a single year, but consistency across decades. The first step is to identify and eliminate structural drag. Structural drag includes fees, unnecessary complexity, and default choices that reduce net returns year after year. This starts with understanding net return, not advertised return. Net return is what remains after fees, taxes, and inefficiencies. If two investment options differ by 2% in net terms, that difference must be treated as decisive, not cosmetic. The second step is to simplify the system. Complexity often hides inefficiency. Many people hold multiple overlapping funds, legacy products, or default employer plan options that were never revisited. Simplification means consolidating into a small number of low-cost, transparent investments whose behavior is easy to understand. When the system is simple, efficiency is easier to monitor and maintain. The third step is to create a review rule, not a reaction habit. This means reviewing the system at fixed intervals, once per year is sufficient, to check fees, allocations, and contribution rates. The purpose is not to react to markets, but to ensure that small drifts have not turned into permanent losses. This prevents inertia from locking in underperformance. Another key element is protecting contribution efficiency. A slightly higher return matters most when contributions are consistent. Automating contributions ensures discipline, but automation must be paired with efficient vehicles. Automation into an inefficient system compounds the wrong outcome. Automation into an efficient system compounds the right one. This approach is stable because it does not depend on forecasting markets, timing entries, or finding superior assets. It relies on arithmetic rather than prediction. Lower fees, better structure, and consistent contributions work regardless of market conditions. The system benefits from volatility over time instead of being threatened by it. Importantly, this solution does not require changing behavior frequently. Once the structure is set, the system runs quietly. There is no need for constant monitoring or emotional decision-making. Stability comes from removing sources of friction, not from chasing performance. Consider how this plays out mechanically. Eliminating a 2% drag increases the base on which compounding operates every year. That larger base compounds again and again. The improvement accelerates over time without additional effort. The benefit grows precisely because nothing else changes. This is why the solution is not risky. It does not increase exposure or leverage. It reduces leakage. It improves the efficiency of money that is already being saved and invested. The risk profile remains the same. The outcome changes because the system is no longer quietly working against the investor. In practical terms, the difference between a 5% and 7% outcome is not skill or luck. It is structure. When structure is corrected early and maintained consistently, the long-term result shifts dramatically. The same income, the same savings habit, and the same market environment produce a fundamentally different financial outcome, not through effort, but through design. When the analysis is viewed as a whole, The conclusion is direct. The financial mistake is not failing to earn more, save more, or take risk. It is allowing small, persistent inefficiencies to remain embedded in the system for decades. A 2% difference is not a minor detail. It is a structural variable that determines the final outcome. The complete framework has four elements. First, every long-term financial decision must be evaluated in net terms. This means focusing on what remains after fees, taxes, and inefficiencies, not on advertised or nominal numbers. A difference that appears small on an annual statement must be translated into future dollars. If a decision reduces long-term outcomes by six figures, it should be treated as significant regardless of how small it looks today. Second, efficiency must be protected by design, not by vigilance. Systems that rely on constant attention fail over time. The goal is to eliminate recurring sources of drag, high fees, unnecessary complexity, poorly chosen defaults, and replace them with simple structures that maintain efficiency automatically. Once these structures are in place, the need for intervention drops sharply. Third, financial systems require scheduled review, not frequent adjustment. A single annual review is sufficient to confirm that fees have not increased, allocations remain appropriate, and contributions are still flowing into efficient vehicles. This prevents small changes from compounding into permanent losses without introducing timing risk. Fourth, consistency must be preserved. Compounding only works when contributions continue uninterrupted. Improving efficiency without consistency reduces impact. Consistency without efficiency compounds the wrong result. Both must exist together. Now consider the timeline. After 1 year, the change feels modest. Eliminating a 2% drag may improve outcomes by a few $1,000s. The improvement is visible, but not dramatic. This is why many people underestimate its importance. After 5 years, the effect becomes tangible. The higher efficiency system begins to pull ahead. The difference is no longer theoretical. Account balances diverge, and the gap continues to widen without additional effort. After 10 years, the system-level advantage is clear. The efficient path can be tens of thousands of dollars ahead. More importantly, the growth rate itself is higher. Each additional year increases the absolute difference. Beyond 10 years, the outcome becomes decisive. Over 25 to 35 years, the same income, the same savings behavior, and the same market environment can produce a 300,000 or greater difference. Not because of superior forecasting or risk-taking, but because compounding was allowed to operate without leakage. The actions required now are practical. Identify where a 1-2% drag exists in your system. Translate that drag into long-term dollar outcomes. Simplify and replace inefficient structures. Schedule a single annual review to preserve efficiency. This approach does not promise quick results. It removes obstacles that quietly prevent results from appearing. When the system is efficient, time does the rest. The final point is simple. Financial outcomes are not determined by how hard money works in a single year, but by how consistently it is allowed to work without interference. Small differences matter because time magnifies them. When those differences are addressed early, decades of effort finally compound in your favor.